All right. So welcome to Studio 58A live here at the Jamaica Information Service live on Facebook. I'm your host, Vaughn Davis. Thank you to everyone joining us online, wherever you are around the world. We truly appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time. As you watch, remember to send in your questions and your comments so we can put them to our guest and have a really good, lively discussion. And like how we have you, do us a favor now. Share this video with a friend or two or 30 or 50 so we can have a real full participation. Now, May is Child's Month, and we pay respect to this observance because we have in studio today someone who has become synonymous with protecting the rights and freedoms of Jamaica's children. Her title is a dead giveaway. We have in studio children's advocate, Mrs. Diahann Gordon Harrison. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, Ms. Gordon Harrison, our original plan was to have an actual child in studio conducting this interview. But every child or parent that we asked had one response: exams.
Right, absolutely.
CSEC, CAPE, end of year, everybody is busy. It kind of begs the question of whose decision it was to make Child's Month
in May.
the one that they're the busiest.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But anyway, what we did was we had some children record some questions, which we will play, and then you will take them one by one, and then you can answer them and give your responses. That will be the format for the most part for our interview. So if our technical people are ready, let's start with the first question.
My name is Kajan A. Taylor. I am 10 years old, and I attend Brandon Hill Primary School. My question is, what does a children's advocate do? My name is Kajan.
Right, so did you get that?
Yes,
what
I
does
did.
the children's advocate do? What are your roles and functions, essentially?
Right, so even though that's coming from a 10-year-old, it's a question we get from persons of all ages and all walks of life. So I'm really happy to answer that and thank her for her question. So essentially, the Children's Advocate really heads a commission of Parliament known as the Office of the Children's Advocate. And as the name suggests, we are there to do all things in relation to children. And in Jamaica, a child is anyone under the age of 18 years. So even though sometimes teenagers think they're a little bit more sophisticated and don't want to be called children, the law still recognizes them as such. And so my responsibility is to head up the office and to ensure, for example, if children need legal representation, we represent them in courts, in any kind of setting that would provide that really good outlet for them to have the best protection, to have their rights enforced and not to have anything disadvantageous happen to them. We also investigate matters that have children at the center of it being affected in a negative way. So sometimes it can overlap with a police investigation because it could be that a child has been sexually abused, or it could be something on the civil side. A child is in a motor vehicle accident and because of carelessness on the road, serious injury comes to that child. So it could be any matter, any kind of matter. We also advise the government as a whole on policies, review laws, look at practices and so on to ensure that they are child-specific and also child-appropriate. And I issue guidance and best practice. For example, we have issued child justice guidelines, which really seek to provide basic rules that govern all stakeholders in the justice sector who may have to deal with children. So it really is that all-encompassing role that deals with putting the child front and center, speaking on behalf of the child who may not be in a position to speak or who may not be as articulate in terms of putting the issues forward, but ensuring that we are child-centered in our focus.
So is it the situation that, for example, if, let's say, a child is before the courts but their parents are in a position to provide legal representation, do you still intervene in that particular instance, or is it more of a case-by-case basis?
It's a case-by-case basis, but increasingly we have had a lot of matters, particularly matters before the Supreme Court, whereby both lawyers are there for either side. So let's say it's divorce proceedings and the issue of custody comes up. So the father may have his attorney, the mother may have her attorney, but the court wants to hear from an independent attorney who is going to advise as to what's best for the child in these particular circumstances. So we have really appeared in matters that have three attorneys, ourselves and attorneys on either side. And also, as you've mentioned, particularly in the criminal matters, we come into the picture if it is that there is a financial need and the child, for example, who is charged for to a serious offense or who has to be questioned by the police doesn't have legal representation, then we would come into the fray in that way. And the flip side also occurs where it's a child who is the victim. And we need to ensure that the victim's best voice, if you will, is being put forward. Because, you know, when you have cohesive victim accounts that are captured with persons or by persons who have emotional intelligence to communicate effectively with the child, then the child will be able to put forward his or her best evidence, which would ultimately lead to the person who did wrong being held accountable.
Now, before I move on to the second question, just to clarify for me, is it a situation that you're only called in? Are there specific offenses for which you are called in to watch proceedings or take an active interest, or is it any incident that involves a child that comes before the court that you can take an interest in?
Right. The law actually provides that right to any child, that if there is any matter at all, there's no limit to say it has to be a particular type of offense. But the law actually says in Section 4 that if a child appears before a court and the judge recognizes that that child does not have legal representation, the court must do one of two things: stop the case and contact the children's advocate so that the legal protection can be put in place for the child, or in the alternative, if there are legal aid attorneys available locally and, you know, they're accessible, then that route could be taken. So really there is no limit as to the kind of matters. What activates my jurisdiction and that of my office is just a child being in need.
Just a child being needed before the course, and you just take an interest to make sure that their interests are best safeguarded.
Absolutely,
essentially.
Yes.
All right, so I'd like to play question number 2, which is from the same.
Another question is, how can I protect myself on social media websites? I protect myself on social media websites.
Social media, just do it twice to make it nice, right? Now, I understand that you have your office has been taking a special interest in the behavior of our young Jamaicans on social media, naturally, because there's a lot of bad that comes with it. And so it makes sense to teach them how, as part of teaching them how to protect themselves, to how to operate safely on social media. So over to you.
Absolutely. I wish I could meet this little girl because in 2016, the Office of the Children's Advocate embarked on what we call, and we still call it, our Be Social, Be Smart social media campaign. And essentially what that did was it saw us going to different schools, both at the primary and secondary level, meeting with students, interviewing them, and also posing scenarios to them to get from them how they use social media, how they view it, what platforms they use more than the other, and in fact, how it is they thought that they should be interfacing with social media. And what we did is, having received those results, we compiled the research findings, which we have in fact published. And then since that, we use those research findings to inform social media guides that we have developed. In fact, we have 3 separate guides. We have the guides for the little ones who are still mostly playing games. That's the below 12. And then we have the 12 to 17, 18, the teenagers who are using it for different purposes. Reasons, and then we have a guide that we developed for adults. And in these 3 guides, we actually have very specific ways that children can do things to be aware of the dangers in cyberspace, on the social media platforms, on the internet, and we have given them very practical tips as to how to protect themselves. For example, in the little ones, which we use very child-appropriate language, we have said, for instance, you shouldn't be posting exactly where you are in terms of geographic location, in terms of mommy's house or mommy's office in Halfway Tree. You shouldn't be giving out your full name, your parents' name, and so on, because persons can take this information, pose as if they in fact know you, and indicate that they want to meet you somewhere, and then you could get co-opted. For the teenagers who are a little bit more sophisticated, and before I go on, I just want to show the viewers that this is in fact the social media guide for the children under 12 years, which we have graphics specially devised to bring home the message. And this one, I particularly find it very attractive because we have invented Sam and Sally Social, who are our two mascots, who actually speak to the children in child-friendly language.
Right,
so there is a Sam and Sally Social song, a jingle that children can learn, and it really is imparting tips about what they can do to keep themselves safe. You notice that there's a cartoon version of me
so I noticed,
here that was designed with the message. And it really is looking at each person, what they can do. So this one was about a mother who was sharing everything about her daughter's birthday, where she was, how old her daughter was, and so on. And the story goes all the way to different activities that the child would do, and eventually a potential predator showed up at the school using all the information that had been on social media about the child, and then, posing that they were a friend of the mother. As I said, we also have the media, the social media guide for teenagers. So this would be your 12 to 18 years. So it's not less
animated.
Less animated, but just as appropriate language that children can in fact understand. And again, it tells them, for example, we mention and touch on the theme of even human trafficking, because what we're seeing now is that human traffickers are using Facebook and other social media websites to profile their victims before they actually reach out to them in a bid to recruit them. So we've said to them, yes, we know you like hanging out with your friends and hashtagging and posting where you are. Yes, we know that sometimes you may be tempted to take provocative pictures of yourself and post them, but these are some of the things that can come your way if you do that. We speak to them as well about responsible posting, because some employers now are increasingly consulting social media to get a profile of the person whose resume is before them.
Right,
so we're having those conversations with them as to how your social media persona can in fact impact you negatively in the future. And the last guide is the social media guide for the adults, with a very strong focus on parents and teachers, because sometimes parents are not as tech savvy as their children,
don't quite know how
and
to
they
speak
don't
to them.
know how to speak to them, and they don't know how to protect them while they're in these spaces. So this really seeks to put the parent in cyberspace world with the child, so they can parent in that arena, because our firm view at the Office of the Children's Advocate is that social media is here to stay. The platforms are only going to get more and more, and you're going to find that if you're not parenting in this space, you'd be missing a very huge part of your child's life, and it could really lead to very unwelcome developments, if you will.
That's Miss Diahann Gordon Harrison, children's advocate, sharing some very important tips for youngsters, not just youngsters, or children, teenagers, those who don't necessarily want to consider themselves so young, but there's still very important information for them. Thank you for sharing this with us. I mean, I'm sure there are many persons who may not have appreciated the depth of the impact that social media can have on their future and their lives and their safety. Especially. We invite you to send in your questions and your comments, any that you might have. She's right here. Take advantage of the opportunity to ask her all the questions that you need. Some persons online are saying that they can't quite hear the questions loud enough, so if you could turn them up, that would be great. We can move on. Well, checking in is Miss Yvonne Gentles, who's more like a command. It says to stop letting the children burn up in fire, which I can tell you we both agree with that.
Absolutely.
And we just as an aside, we know that the government recently started a program where they have been distributing solar lamps to persons in communities which may not have ready access to electricity, so that they can have an alternative to lamps and candles and those kind of dangerous implements that cause these fires. So there is something being done, Ms. Gentles, and we appreciate you taking the time to comment. Now, can we move on to our third question? To our technical team.
My name is Otelia Nelson. I am 8 years old and I attend Brandon Hill Primary School. My question is, what can a child do if they are facing bullying? What can a child do if they are facing bullying?
Well, over to you, Ms. Gordon Harrison.
All right, so bullying remains an issue. There are mild forms of bullying, and there are very drastic and excessive forms. We believe in what I call no bully zones. And for me, usually what I tell children, and there's no one answer to this because, as I said, there's a range of activities that can be so classified. But usually, once I'm dealing with a victim of bullying, one of the first questions I ask them is, tell me about the bully. And invariably what I find is that bullies are persons who are very insecure, lacking in self-sufficiency, have a poor image of themselves, so they have low self-esteem, and sometimes as well there's an accompanying social issue. So it could be something in the home, so they're acting out at school because of what's happening in the home and they're frustrated. It could be something at school whereby they don't feel as if they're being actualized or being valued, and so they're acting out to get attention. And it could be something that has to do with parenting as well, whereby the social skills have not been properly imparted to this child, and so the child doesn't know how to operate within a particular setting. Usually what I say is do not take bullying lightly, however, because while the bully is somebody who is fractured, who has issues, who needs an intervention, the victim cannot sit idly by because it can escalate very quickly. And also you could have a child who is being a victim in a situation, and that impacts the child's learning, the child's physical well-being, and in fact the child's self-esteem as well. So I usually say if it's in a school setting, speak to the guidance counselor. Have a responsible adult know what's happening. If there's no guidance counselor in your school, because I know some schools don't have one, speak to your class teacher or some other teacher who you have a relationship with, so that a responsible adult knows of the situation. Outside of that as well, the Office of the Children's Advocate is there. We do not necessarily deal with it on a one-on-one basis because we have no psychologist ourselves, but we do know how to access persons who have that skill set and who can actually assist with making an intervention on behalf of the victim while the bully gets some assistance.
All right, so they have some options. They can, remember kids, you can talk to your teacher, talk to your guidance counselor, talk to a responsible adult, somebody who you trust, let them know, and then they can take measures or take steps to help resolve the situation. I mean, there is some power that you have. You might feel weak because of the bullying, but you do have some power. You can take action and rectify things, right?
Right. In fact, if I may add, I'm happy you said that, because one of the greatest tools that a bully has that they keep taking advantage of is the silence of the victim. And so there is great power as a victim in finding that one person that you can speak to, because when you expose it, you put the bully under the spotlight now, and they're on the back foot. So do not be afraid to speak up, even if it's confidentially, but somebody needs to know so they can intervene on your behalf.
All right. You seem like you're interacting so well with the questions from children who aren't actually here. I wish the children were here. But, okay, we have a nice momentum going. Let's see if we can have the next question.
My other question is, what are some of the rights of children in Jamaica? What are some of the rights of children in Jamaica?
All right. Do I just take it straight? Or
what are some of the rights of children in Jamaica? That's what our questionnaire had asked for you.
Okay. All right. So children in Jamaica enjoy global rights, which means that there are a set of universal rights as established under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And Jamaica has signed and ratified that convention. So it means that all the rights that are listed in that convention are applicable in Jamaica. Some of them are very obvious. For example, the right to life. So nobody should just arbitrarily kill a child because they feel like. Nobody should punish a child to the point of death. They have a right to be protected. Right? So that means if there is harm that they're exposed to, they have a right to access help from a responsible adult or institution that will seek to protect them. They have the right to shelter, so a home so they can be protected from the elements and also from prospective crime, because let's face it, this is Jamaica. So if you're living on the street and you're not in a home, it means you're more exposed, you're more vulnerable. They have the right to food so that they can thrive and develop. They have the right to an education because we're looking not just at the physical benefit that a child has a right to, but also what we call developmental rights. So education will help them to be literate, to have great numeracy skills, reasoning skills, and ability. And that will then allow them to develop and achieve their full potential and really be able to contribute to Jamaica once they attain adulthood. They have the right as well, very interestingly, to play. This is one that I think is a huge thing because I've often heard persons complaining, usually a tad parent.
You know, too much, my mom can't go take a book or something
absolutely.
Like that, right?
But the convention recognizes that a huge part of developmental growth of a child, based on how the brain evolves and how they learn and how they communicate, is that they have the right to play, they have the right to leisure, they have the right to relaxation. So the convention recognizes balance. What are the things that are needed in good measure to ensure that a whole child is developed and not a partial child? And so it recognizes those rights. It speaks interestingly as well to the right to spiritual and moral guidance, whatever that is. So whether the child is Christian, Jewish faith, Muslim, you name it, it recognizes that there has to be this kind of guidance there for a child that will help the child to determine, for example, right from wrong. What makes it inappropriate for you not to stab somebody if you have a disagreement with them? And the thinking behind it is that if there is no moral compass, then you will more quickly draw a knife as opposed to try to talk it out and reason it out. So there are a whole slew of rights that the convention speaks to. But what I always like to put in the equation as well, though, is that along with the right to be given food and health care and education and, you know, shelter and all of that, comes the responsibility part, you know, which we have to talk about. So a very good example I normally use is, yes, children have a right to an education, but it means that if they're in an educational institution that their parents have afforded them the opportunity of attending and the school has afforded them the opportunity of having a place there, then they have to respect the rules of the school. They have to respect the teachers and the persons in authority. They have to do their homework as well because it is a partnership. So with every right, there is a corresponding responsibility.
And so, so you hear that children, the onus is not just on the adults to look out for you. You are an active participant in your own development and growth and so on. So there is more. It's not just one-sided. You know what I mean? So you have to be a participant and make sure that you grow up to be a. I don't want to say, you know. I think I'll leave it there. Let's move on to the next question.
My name is Trevon Williamson. I am 9 years old. I attend the Brandon Hill Primary School. My question is, how can I help my parents protect me from harm? How can I help my parents protect me from harm?
These kids are amazing. And he has really touched on something that's very critical. We have some collateral material that the Office of the Children's Advocate has developed. And the one that comes to mind now is a little guide that says it's directed to children about things that they can do to keep themselves safe. One of the things that's very critical in that component in terms of the dynamic between child helping parent to keep them safe is communication. So if your parents don't know about an experience that you've had, they can't assist and make an intervention. If you haven't even had an experience, you need to communicate whenever anything feels kind of off. And in fact, you need to communicate just on a regular basis, not just when you think something is off. Because I've always said to parents that this thing of having your teenager speak to you doesn't just start when the kid hits 13. It's something you should be culturing and nurturing from the get-go, because if that child doesn't understand at age 3 that I can speak to mommy or daddy about any and everything, they won't suddenly start doing that when they hit 13.
That's a learned behavior.
Exactly, it's learned behavior, and children naturally sometimes are going to withdraw if something feels uncomfortable.
That's true.
So we as parents, as adults and influencers in their lives, really have to ensure that we keep what I call an open relationship, So yes, you're the parent in that relationship, and the child must always understand that. But we need to move away from the kind of what I call draconian parenting, whereby your child is literally afraid of you. Because if the child is afraid, then and they don't know how you will respond to news that may not be the best, then they may want to suffer in silence because they're afraid of the wrath that may come their way. So one of the best things to do, and little ones, I'm encouraging you to do it, is to communicate with your parents. I have heard, for example, not in Jamaica, but in other jurisdictions, where convicted sex offenders have said very clearly that we know that we can get away with abusing children sexually because they'll never speak. And once they don't speak, that gives us the power to continue. So it's very, very important that we understand the importance of communicating on all issues, so that when the hard ones come and the conversation is a little more difficult, yes, they may be a little shy, but they'll still tell you. So communicate, communicate, communicate.
That's Diahann Gordon Harrison sharing some very valuable lessons to our parents and children in JR Studio 58, a real fruitful discussion. And following up on something you just said about communicating with our children, it seems that on the flip side, something else that parents should be mindful of is you don't necessarily want to come across as trying to be your child's friend and being too pally-pally with your child, because when the time comes for discipline and real tough decisions to be made, that can have a negative impact on well. Weigh in on that for me.
I've heard this before. My thing is your parent first, right? So that must be established in terms of how you deal with the child on any event. But parent doesn't mean Don. It doesn't mean dragon, and it doesn't mean dictator. Parent means the person who is in authority in that situation. It doesn't mean that if you have a child who is doing what he or she should do, you can't then transcend into, all right, so let's have some fun. Because for me, if you can have that mix, it's great. But it doesn't mean that you are having a good relationship and you're friendly with your child, not friends, but friendly towards your child. That if the child steps out of line, you're going to say, hey, we're friends, I can't correct him. Absolutely not. For me, the dynamics of a good parent is one who can straddle all different scenarios and take the right tone with that child. So when the child is doing okay and you're okay, then we're good. But if that child steps out of line, he or she understands that the parent had no friend in this business is going to come up. Because so it's about straddling all the different scenarios and maintaining that position of guiding the child depending on the situation that you find yourself in. All right.
Let's move on to the next question and keep the momentum going. Can we have the next question?
My other question is, how can I help the children's advocate to keep children safe? The children's advocate to keep children safe.
Over to you. How can children help your office to keep more children across Jamaica safe?
All right. So Brandon Hill, from what I remember, is rural St. Andrew, right? Oh, it's Clarendon.
Yes.
Whoops. Okay. I was thinking Brandon Hill was in the hills of St. Andrew. All right. Well, the Office of the Children's Advocate, because we speak for kids, believe that we should be communicating with kids to hear what are some of the issues that bother them and the issues that we need to be chiming in on and the interventions we need to make. And so we have a children's advisory panel that we meet with. We have a very vibrant WhatsApp group as well, and they keep us in touch with what's happening in their neck of the woods and what are some of the issues they think we should be talking about and things that we should be doing. Outside of that, because of course it's a panel, not every child in Jamaica is on the panel because of space, we have active social media presence, and so we take all kinds of input through our Facebook pages. We are on Instagram as well. And in fact, we have a comments column on our website that we can actually receive comments through that particular medium. And so for me, one of the most critical things and contributions that a child can make is to share if there's something happening in your school or your community. There's a trend that you notice. Boys in grade 3 not coming to school, they don't by the river all the time. That's information that you may not know what's happening specifically, but you can give us a heads up.
And let the parents know these things, you know, let the children know.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So you give us a heads up so that we can know if we need to come in to do an intervention in that particular school, if we need to be talking to parents a little bit more in that community about how they can do things to ensure that these issues do not in fact recur and affect the children negatively. So again, being our eyes and ears on the ground in your neck of the woods is something that we appreciate quite a bit.
All right, just checking in online, we have a comment from Antoinette Weber saying very informative. Thank you, Antoinette. Appreciate it. We love your feedback, and this is your program. So keep your comments and your questions coming. We love that. And from Ray Sheppy giving us a thumbs up right back at you.
Yeah.
All right, can we move on to the next question?
Hi, my name is Kamoy Campbell and I am 17 years old. My first question is, what are some of the signs to look out for in children who may have been getting abused or mistreated? Hi, some of the signs to look out for in children who may have been getting abused or mistreated.
All right, so what are some of the signs that children can look out for among their peers to help them identify persons who may be getting abused or mistreated or something like that?
All right, so once you know the person, it becomes a lot easier to tell. Mood swings are a dead giveaway. So if you have a friend or a colleague in your class, a student, classmate, who is usually very out there, very vivacious and lively and so on, and taking part in everything at school, and suddenly for an extended period, that person becomes very withdrawn. They don't want to play netball anymore. They don't want to go out to lunch. They don't want to talk to you, and it's consistent. Then that's something that is a red flag. The opposite is also true. Somebody who is usually very shy, not talking a lot, very into their shell, if all of a sudden they're very provocative and acting all
acting out and being
and being the center of
that.
attention and so on, then that sometimes is a dead giveaway as well. So mood swings. Also, if you have somebody who seems very almost physically disheveled. I've said to teachers, for example, that your student. So if you have a student who's usually well put together, uniform is clean, hair is well done, and so on, and then all of a sudden you notice that this person is wearing a soiled uniform to school, then it could be an indication that that person is not coming from home. So it could be that the person is now perhaps out of home for 3 days. Where is that person? On the street with an older person who is having an inappropriate sexual connection with him or her. What's happening in that scenario? Also, somebody whose grades tend to fall off all of a sudden. Not saying that a child is going to get 90s or 100s all the time. You'll have a bad test or a bad subject sometimes. But if consistently you find that the grades are falling off, the interest in schoolwork is just not there anymore, they are not attending school regularly, or they're attending but they're not there. You can be present in you're present physically, but you're not present in the moment. So if you find those things happening, then it is, a giveaway. Somebody who tends to be looking off. And then, of course, there are the very obvious signs. Somebody who starts cutting, somebody who starts saying something as well. Because sometimes we'll hear things, children will say things, but we don't take it seriously. Like they'll say, "Child, I just feel like kill myself today." And you may just say, "Okay, Cho, what's wrong with you?" And you move on.
Just acting out or
right.
whatever.
But those things, don't take it so lightly. So sometimes if you hear that, you ask 1 and 2 questions. When you said that at lunch today, what do you mean? Everything all right? Probe it a little bit. Or if you don't want to put yourself in that space to do that probe, again, guidance counselor, principal, teacher, parent, be a tattletale, because that tattletaling may just save that child's life.
You hear that, children? Be a tattletale. Sometimes it's really important not to keep the things I mean, it may very well just save somebody's life.
Absolutely.
All right, I wish we could stay longer, but I'm going to ask for the last question, I believe, to go ahead, and then we can move into the
My second question is, who are some other resource persons I can call on?
other than who are some other resource persons children can call on out there in the country, apart from the children's advocate, if they have needs?
All right. So there are a lot of different entities that do different things. So, for example, there's always the police, 911, 119. I think that we just changed it to 911. I actually heard that. It's not 119 anymore.
As far as I know, it's 119.
Right, that's what I knew, but somebody said we have changed it recently because kids tend to get it mixed up because of the influx of the American media.
Right.
But anyhow, so you call that helpline. There is also the Office of the Children's Registry, 1-888-PROTECT. I don't have my phone, so I can't tell you what protect means right now, but just look at the alphanumeric pad, and it spells out PROTECT, and it's a toll-free number that you can reach out to for assistance. That's actually the centralized number, so that once there's a distress call, then it's logged, and then the matter is passed on for handling and investigation.
Okay.
Of course, there are other entry points as well. For instance, I keep stressing guidance counselors, because guidance counselors, and in fact all teachers and principals and people who work in schools, have been designated under the law as what we call prescribed persons, which means that they have a mandatory duty along with other persons, but they're specially named to actually trigger reports if they hear of a child who is in distress. So do not underestimate those resources that are right there at your fingertips as children, because all teachers, all teaching professionals have this mandatory responsibility to make a report to the registry on your behalf if there is an issue that needs to be brought to the attention of the authorities.
All right. So there are specific persons who have specific responsibilities to ensure that our children are protected once they come into contact with them, and have responsibility for their care and supervision.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. All right. And Miss Antoinette Weber has a comment for you, Miss Gordon Harrison. She says, valuable information. I think you're doing an excellent job. Keep it up.
Thank you, Miss Weber. Thank you very much.
All right, wonderful. So the last question would be from me. Just going forward, going in throughout the rest of the year and over the short to medium term, is there any particular objective that your office is focusing on?
Everything.
Okay.
Everything that relates to children. But outside of that, on a serious note though, we are just on the cusp of launching a new partnership, which we're very excited about. You'll hear more about it in the media. Yes. But really it seeks to boost up the protective arm in a kind of proactive way of the office, in terms of getting resources that are most needed by children who are in seriously difficult circumstances.
Okay.
And so that's something that, as I said, you'll hear more about later this month. In fact, we're getting that together for Child Month. Outside of dealing with that, because we deal with, as I say, a range of issues, we're looking at the framework as well of how we have systems in place that are child-friendly and child-appropriate. So another big one that's coming on stream, we have started it already, but another phase is about to come upon us, is the Child Justice Guidelines, which I mentioned previously. Right. We have had the opportunity to have capacity building sessions for all members of the judiciary so far. And the next phase has to do with building up the capacity of police officers who remain first responders, who remain the ones that have to interact with a child who has just been raped. And they now have to take a statement and get that child ready for court. They're the ones who have to arrest children if they have done anything wrong. So in building that out, we're in fact on the cusp of doing a range of capacity building and sessions and seminars with police officers across the island to ensure that our institutions are child responsive and child appropriate, in keeping with the protocols of the UN Convention. And those are just two of the things that I'll mention at this point.
Okay,
yes.
All right, we won't get too much into it. It seems like you would talk all day if you have the chance.
Yes.
All right, last question for me. Does this work become disheartening at times? Is this work overwhelming for you when you have to, as you said, deal with children who have been victims of sexual abuse or neglect, or any one of these horrible violations that they end up having to deal with? Does this work? How do you manage and pull through each day and keep doing the work?
All right, so there are good days and there are bad days. There are days when you feel as if, yes, I've done this and this child has had this particular result and I'm very happy about it. And then right when you're on that high, you hear of another incident and you're like, oh my gosh, here we go again. So there are good days and there are bad days. How do we keep going on, both me individually and as an office, is that we recognize that for every sense of disappointment we may feel, if we allow that sense of disappointment to take hold of us and control us and almost dictate our movements, then it's going to affect our impact for the next child who needs us to be just as ready to assist him or her. And so that really is what keeps me going. Because we can't afford to have the disheartening continue for too long, because then it's going to affect our effectiveness.
All right, wonderful. Miss Diahann Gordon Harrison, children's advocate, in here sharing some very, very valuable information about protecting our children, how we as adults can work and do things to keep them protected, and how they themselves can work with the adults, with their friends, and protect themselves and find a way to make sure that they reduce the violations and the different negative challenges that children have to face. We really appreciate you taking the time. It has been a wonderful conversation, much longer than our typical ones, but we're getting lots of valuable information, so didn't want to stop the flow.
So thank you for having me.
Thank you to everyone who tuned into our discussion, especially those who sent in their questions and their comments. And if you have a question or a comment, feel free to leave it. We will be checking the post later and we're going through. So if you have a question, we'll try our best to answer it. If we can't, we'll send it over to Miss Gordon Harrison's office so she can take that on. And remember, our audience plays a major part in our show. If there's anyone in particular that you want to see, just let us know in the comments and we'll try our best to have them in studio as soon as possible. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Jamaica Information Service to see who will be in studio next. We do this every Thursday live on Facebook. I've been your host, Vaughn Davis, and this has been JIS Studio 58A Live. Thank you again for joining us, and please have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.